Welcome back to class and programming and planning in youth ministry. We're going to jump right into the work text on page 32, chapter 6, where we talk about some safety planning. We ask a lot of questions in youth ministry, don't we? When we feel like things aren't going well, we ask a lot of questions about our planning, or maybe about the purpose, or maybe about the execution of certain things that we do, or maybe about we drill down deep and ask, is our heart right? Are we doing things for the right reasons? Are we praying enough? And these are all viable questions, and they're all important questions that we need to continue to ask. Evaluation, although sometimes painful, is very revealing and can help us strengthen what we do and continue to be more on target with where we're supposed to be in the things that we're endeavoring to do to reach teenagers and to help them grow into the adult Christians and believers to be on mission with God's church. But one of the questions that I think we don't spend enough time on. I know we do spend time on this question, but we don't spend enough time on. That is, how am I making my ministry safe for students? And in reality, that's a question that sometimes I think we skip because we don't see it as being very critical. You can see there in your work text the news reports the youth ministry tragedies from time to time, and you'll hear of a bus wreck on the way home from camp, or you'll hear about serious injuries being on a ski retreat, or a ministry team that does maybe a stunt team or a skating team, and there's an injury. With different kinds of activities, we find that these are very common in youth ministry. And honestly, it's not just a youth ministry thing. It's just common when we participate in certain kinds of activities. And the reality is that if we're not diligent to care for the students that are in our student ministry, how much would parents continue to allow their students to participate? And you got to see this as connecting to the Great Commission. If you don't see everything you do in youth ministry as connecting to the Great Commission, then it's very difficult to find the motivation and the energy to put time into thinking through these things. And the reality is that safety planning is something that can prohibit the communication of the gospel message. And when we forego asking the hard question about safety, we run the risk that is really not worth taking, and that in most cases isn't necessary to take. So we look at some things here in chapter 6, and we understand how much is involved in programming and ministering to students, and that it is very easy to forget this area of safety. And one thing I want to say about this before we dive into some of these notes is that in the end, there is not a 100% guarantee on any of these measures. But when there is no preparation, there's a greater opportunity for tragedy and for just being distracted, as well as discouraged, and injury to your students, as well as total ineffectiveness in the program that you're participating in that particular setting. So let's look at the problem. What is the problem? The problem is stated very simply, is that youth ministry programs can at times be completely unsafe. And there's a couple of reasons why. When we look at two key reasons why, is that kids are wild. Teenagers think they're indestructible. If you don't believe that, then you need to go on a mission trip, and if there's a challenge, you're going to find some teenagers, mostly teenage guys, but you'll find some teenagers that'll rise to the occasion to jump off cliffs. They're usually the first ones that want to jump on zip lines. When I take my daughters to amusement parks, they're both ones in line with me to get on the roller coasters and experience the thrill. Teenagers sometimes don't see their own mortality, and it's a legitimate concern, but it's also to be expected. They're teenagers. They're in a stage of life when things are brand new, and so they don't always weigh the options. That's part of their development in their own personal maturity, and we're supposed to help with that. And that leads me to the second point there, is that another reason why youth ministry programs can sometimes be unsafe is because youth leaders can be immature. Well, teenagers are immature. They're growing, they're developing, and moving towards adulthood. But the problem is that when you have youth leaders who are adults that are immature, it can really create opportunities for tragedy and for safety issues to arise. And so we got to be careful about that. So if that's the problem, if safety is a constant thing that we need to look at, what would be the result of not paying attention, of not making the necessary preparations? When we look at the results, there's so many different things that we could talk about, but I zeroed this into about 5 different things. One, you've got property damage. You can do some damage, and that property damage has some furthering consequences. One of the camps that I was able to lead in a church in Florida where I served, We always rented a facility, and we produced our own summer camp with our students and middle school and high school. And one year we actually partnered with another church in South Florida, and as sometimes you do at camps, we also rent golf carts so we can make sure our security and the nursing staff and the recreation staff and our leadership can get around the 20 or 25 acres worth of camp property rather quickly to attend to certain needs. And so we had several golf carts. Well, one night we didn't really think about the security of those golf carts, and it was something that one of our volunteers happened to leave two of the carts with keys in them. Well, we had some students at this particular camp that weren't believers, and our camps were always focused on reaching out to unsaved kids and unchurched kids, and so we always had a healthy amount of those students at camp, and some of these kids just wanted to have fun. So one of the things they did is they grabbed our golf carts and they took off. Well, when they took off, they actually ran over some water pipes that were in the ground, because at this camp they had some places where some RVs could be parked and hooked up to water, so some folks could come different times of the year to help serve at the camp and do work projects. And so there weren't any RVs parked there, but it was dark at night, and these kids took the golf cart and they ran right over the water pipes, and we had some property damage that night. Quite a few things happened, and it's not a very good thing, but in the end we had about a little over $2,000 worth of damage done at the camp. Well, didn't factor that into my budget, as you can imagine. And so that's one area that, as we moved forward for the following year and for other events, we took a lot more, gave a lot more attention to those types of areas, and really took our time to think through some of the details and ask about safety. And you can end up with a lot of property damage. Second is you can end up with an injury of a teen. That very same year, we had a group of girls on that same night. It was a crazy night, by the way, who decided to put on war paint, and they just went out running around the property. Well, when this group of girls came around one part of the property, they went by the work area, the shed where a lot of the tractors and the equipment was stored. And this young lady, as they were running down, there's a pack of girls running down the road, and she happened to scrape her arm on a piece of metal that was sticking out, and had to be taken to the emergency room. And I'm sure many of you can identify situations, and you've experienced situations. You can think of examples from your own churches of different problems, especially with property damage and injury to a teenager. And third is we look at the loss of respect and trust from parents. That's another result. And this is hard to really detect, and it can be deadly to handle when it comes to the climate of the student ministry and what you're trying to accomplish. But a lot of times parents will disappear and they move to another church, or they go somewhere different and they don't even tell you. But it's because of your lack of diligence and thinking through what's going on and creating a safe environment and secure environment for their teenagers. Fourth is you can end up with lawsuits against you. You can be sued. And you need to find out what kind of coverage you have at your church when it comes to having activities, and maybe what's covered when it comes to you as far as lawsuits that may come against you or the church. But the reality is this: we don't just safety plan to avoid lawsuits. The primary role of safety planning is to keep in mind the safety of the students that we're serving and their families. And then the final thing is the unfortunate, the unforeseeable can happen, and that is the death of a teenager. I have several friends in youth ministry who've experienced this. I personally have not experienced this, and I'm thankful to God that I did not have to walk through that. I have experienced the death of a teenager because of illness, but not because of an accident that happened during a youth ministry event. And no matter what the scenario, it's always difficult. But you definitely do not want to be faced with a situation where there are issues of safety that you run through your brain and wonder if things could have been avoided. But these are just some things that can happen, and these are some of the results that come about from lack of safety planning. What are some key attention areas? If you look there on page 33, we look at some key attention areas for safety planning. And I really just put 4 there simply because I think these categorize some very common areas that we look at in youth ministry. And in order to build safety in the youth ministry programs, you got to pay attention. And so these are some key attention areas. If you have any of these going on in any type of program, you really need to take a step back and look at these diligently to make sure that you're making the right considerations for safety. The first thing is transportation. Anytime you put kids in vehicles, whether it's on a travel bus, whether it's on a 15-passenger van, whether it's in automobiles, you need to know that that is a potential key area for safety and security for your teenagers. Also, athletic events, which really has to do with anything that you do specifically that has to do with basketball leagues, playing in the gym, overnight activities in the gym, but specifically softball and soccer leagues and things that you do that are athletic events. Outdoor events, which would be very similar, but the outdoor events could be paintball events and capture the flag and things that we do that involve outdoor events, and then water events. Pools, lakes, and beaches are just holding grounds for safety issues. And so these are 4 key attention areas, and if any of these are part of the student ministry that you're leading at any given time, you need to make sure, once again, to take a step back and slowly look through that event and make sure that you're taking all the precautions you can with that. And in the end, we really look towards building safety into every program. And so we look at that in the middle of page 33 in your work text. Once you've identified those key areas of attention, there are some other considerations for safety planning. One is the physical setup, their facilities, the travel plans, what could be dangerous along the way. You need to think through the property. If you're going to use a camp, you should visit that camp. And you should walk over the property, and you should think about how you're going to use the property and keep your eyes open for specific areas of concern and potential dangers. Travel plans. You need to think through the safety of your students and what is the best route to take, as well as making sure that you're following good safety practices on the road. You also need waivers and medical forms. You should do this. A lot of student ministries will post these on the website for parents to download. Some student ministries will put medical forms up and have a medical form, a medical release form that has some insurance information as well as some liability information there that they sign once a year. But you also need to have some type of form that is signed for every single event. I know it seems redundant, but even though you may have parents sign every single year, fill out some medical forms, every time there is an event, there needs to be a fresh communication of the expectations as well as the potential dangers of any type of youth ministry event or activity. And so you need to have something that parents are signing and not just to protect you, but to keep them informed, and so that they are well informed of the risks that may be involved in any particular activity. Personnel. You need to think personnel. We need to have camps and mission trips, especially. You need to, number one, you need to make sure there's adequate security. If you've got 300 kids at a youth camp, you're going to need more than one person to be security. You're probably going to need a team of 3 or 4 or 5 to be security. When it comes to nurses, you're going to need, in a camp that size, you're going to need more than just one nurse. Lifeguards. You got to make sure lifeguards are not just people who at one time could swim. You need to make sure that they're certified and they have the proper training and equipping. It's a good thing to think through when you do your events. In fact, for your whole student ministry, it's a great idea to schedule a volunteer training time and actually have a CPR class for your volunteers so that everyone is equipped with those measures. And then finally, you need to think through emergency procedures and really post those. I'd put them in your youth ministry training material, any manuals that you hand out when we talked about the staff development that we covered in the last chapter. Those procedures, though, at the student ministry, if you're meeting in a regular place at the church, you should have some kind of document that shows emergencies procedures, which would include hospital routes, phone numbers, staff jobs as far as connecting with other staff members at the church that may be able to help. And so what you want to do with these measures is really these 4 things help us build safety into each program. They're always there, and they help us very, very much so create this safe environment. And you got to know, you see there in your sidebar that waivers are just a safety shield, but they're not completely 100% accurate, or not necessarily accurate, effective. Waivers don't completely remove any potential liability or litigation that could come against you if if there aren't good safety practices. Waivers protect the church and the youth leaders from lawsuits. In many cases, they help at least establish there was a relationship of the right intentions and of good trust to be able to communicate in an adequate manner the potential risk. But it doesn't necessarily protect you. But it does help track through that there's an intentionality behind the safety planning measures that you've installed into the ministry there in your student ministry. What about some medical considerations? When you think through safety, it's not just the issues of the actual activity and kids getting hurt. You need to think through the health considerations as well, medical considerations, beginning with health considerations. When you fill out waivers, when you send those things out or you hand them out and you receive them back, you need to look for kids that have asthma, maybe diabetes or allergies that are severe, hemophilia or injuries that are just getting better, kids that may be allergic, especially to different kinds of foods, whether it be for peanuts or gluten, or kids that are allergic to bee stings. All those things need to be covered, and you need to make sure if you don't see them, you need to announce and say, hey folks, as you're handing these forms in, please make sure that you give us every potential health condition that may affect your teenager, so that we are aware and that our nursing staff is aware. Another area for medical concerns is diet. You need to check to see if they have special needs and prohibitions to certain kinds of foods, and do your best to be able to accommodate those things as you have the opportunity to do that. Another area that we look at with medical considerations is that you always have kids that take medication, and some are on regular medication, some are going to camp or mission trips having just recovered from something, but they still have medication, antibiotics or things of that nature that they need to finish out the prescription. And so you need to make sure you track that, make sure that's documented, make sure you know the amount that's supposed to be taken and the schedule that's supposed to be taken on during the day, each day. And that you have something printed, and that no student takes medication on any youth ministry event or activity unless they check in with a nurse, and then someone references that log and make sure that you follow the guidelines specifically. And then I always would recommend every student ministry develop a first aid kit for your trips and for your activities. You need to have a first aid kit that stays on the property. You need to, and this may be something that your church is allowed for as well, and put in different places on the property. But you need to develop. But you also need to have something that'll travel with you as well. So when you go out, and these are just I included there in your work text on page 34 at the end just a grocery list of things that should be included in a first aid kit. I got this from a paramedic, and we put this together. And this is just a basic list. There are some other things that you could add, but these are definitely some things that you would want to keep in there. Now, as we wrap up this particular session, just remember the golden rule of safety planning, and it's asking the honest question: would I send my student, my child who is a teenager, to this program? Now, I know some of you may sit there and when the rubber meets the road, you're there watching your teenager. And so if you're there watching your teenager, you feel a little bit better about the situation. Well, just think about that. All the parents who aren't there observing and being able to care for their teenager. And so you need to ask that question from an honest perspective. Now, many times you're asking that question and you don't have a teenager. Well, just think about your 4-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old. Although the activity may not be age appropriate for who they are developmentally, physically, or emotionally, or some other areas, but just would you want your child to be a part of that? Is it safe? And we take a lot of risks with people's precious treasures. The gifts that God has given them is their children. And we've got to be very careful to make sure that we are taking all the safety measures we can when it comes to planning our student ministry stuff. I hope you read that book, Better Safe Than Sue. There's a lot of great practical advice in there. He's rewritten that book, and you should have the most recent version of that book, Crabtree's book there on Better Safe Than Sue. So check that out. I've also put on the the PowerPoint slide that you're looking at right now. I listed a video that I came across from the South Carolina Baptist Convention. Their youth ministry area is called whystuff.org, and but I also put the link below that for a video that Trip Atkinson from First Baptist Church of Columbia, South Carolina, posted for the South Carolina Baptist Convention. in their youth ministry resource area. So you can click on that. He gives some very practical advice and does it in a great way, really in a short little clip there to give you some very practical suggestions when it comes to safety planning and how important it is. So pay attention to the online forum discussion that we'll have connected to this PowerPoint session, and we will talk to you next time.